Night has already settled over the sea long before the lights appear. At first they seem impossibly small, scattered points of pale illumination floating against a horizon that barely exists. The ocean has dissolved into darkness. The sky has done the same. Between them lies only a vast black distance disturbed by wind and the steady pulse of unseen engines. Somewhere beyond that darkness, war continues its endless work. Guns still fire across distant coastlines. Aircraft still move through the night. Men still wait in trenches, bunkers, forests, deserts, and ruined cities. Yet here, far from any front line, another kind of vessel moves slowly through the darkness. Its shape remains difficult to see until you are close enough to notice the white paint. Then the markings emerge. Large red crosses stretch across hull and deck, visible even beneath the muted lighting imposed by wartime caution. They are symbols recognized across continents and oceans. Symbols intended to separate this ship from the machinery of destruction surrounding it. Symbols that announce a different purpose. Not to fight. Not to transport soldiers toward battle. Not to deliver ammunition. Not to launch aircraft. Instead, this vessel moves in the opposite direction. It carries people away from war. The sea wind brushes across exposed metal railings. Salt gathers along painted surfaces. Somewhere below deck, generators hum with patient consistency. The ship advances through darkness at a measured pace, its course plotted carefully across waters that remain uncertain despite every effort to make them safe. Inside, hundreds of people are awake. Some wear naval uniforms. Some wear medical insignia. Some wear neither. Many lie in rows of narrow beds beneath blankets tucked tightly around injured bodies. Others sit upright, unable to sleep. A few stare toward portholes where nothing can be seen except darkness interrupted by occasional reflections. The motion of the sea gently lifts and lowers the entire world around them. It is a movement impossible to escape and, after enough days, almost impossible to notice. For many aboard, arrival here has come suddenly. Only days earlier, perhaps only hours earlier, they occupied entirely different landscapes. A muddy battlefield. A burning ship. A jungle clearing converted into a field hospital. A shattered city street. A desert aid station filled with dust and heat. Places where survival often depended upon minutes. Places where noise overwhelmed thought and where uncertainty accompanied every decision. Now they find themselves surrounded by white walls, orderly corridors, polished instruments, and routines governed not by combat but by care. The transition can feel unreal. War rarely ends all at once. Often it loosens its grip gradually. A wound is treated. A fever breaks. A stretcher changes hands. A transport vehicle arrives. Another journey begins. Eventually the sounds of battle fade into memory, replaced by the quieter sounds of recovery. Footsteps in hallways. Soft conversations between nurses. The distant vibration of engines beneath the deck. Hospital ships occupied a strange position within the conflicts of the 20th century. They existed inside war while serving purposes that seemed almost opposed to it. They sailed through contested waters carrying not weapons but patience. Their operating rooms functioned while fleets maneuvered beyond the horizon. Their wards remained filled while battles continued elsewhere. They became temporary sanctuaries moving through environments where permanence itself often seemed impossible. Yet sanctuary does not mean peace. Even aboard a vessel devoted to healing, uncertainty remained a constant companion. The sea could still be dangerous. Illness could still spread. Wounds could still worsen. News from distant fronts could still arrive. The future remained unresolved for nearly everyone aboard. And so the hospital ship became something more complicated than a refuge. It became a place suspended between past and future. A floating world occupied by people who had survived one chapter of war but had not yet discovered what would come next. Tonight, as the vessel moves steadily across dark water, that uncertainty fills every corridor. It lingers beside operating tables. It drifts through crowded wards. It waits quietly beside bunks where exhausted patients finally surrender to sleep after days of pain and movement. The ship continues forward. The sea continues breathing around it. And somewhere beyond the darkness, the war waits. So, before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these quiet journeys into history. And now, as the sea stretches outward in every direction and the ship continues its patient voyage through uncertain waters, let us step aboard once more. You're listening to Echoes of War. Morning arrives slowly at sea. The first light does not appear as a sunrise so much as a gradual surrender of darkness. Black water becomes charcoal gray. The horizon emerges from invisibility. Shapes that seem suspended in emptiness during the night begin to recover their outlines. Lifeboats hang quietly from davits. Ventilation shafts rise above the decks. Crew members move through passageways carrying out duties that have already become routine long before most patients awaken. From above, the vessel appears almost serene. The wake spreads behind it in a long pale ribbon. Seabirds occasionally drift overhead when land lies somewhere beyond the horizon. Clouds gather and disperse according to patterns older than any nation at war. To an observer watching from a distance, there is little evidence of the human stories contained within the hull. Yet beneath those decks, entire lives occupy a temporary balance between danger and recovery. A nurse begins her rounds before breakfast. She moves through rows of beds illuminated by soft morning light filtering through portholes and overhead lamps. Temperatures are taken. Dressings are checked. Notes are updated. Small observations become important. A change in breathing. A slight reduction in fever. A patient finally sleeping after a difficult night. Nearby, surgeons prepare for procedures that cannot wait until arrival in port. Elsewhere, cooks begin feeding hundreds of people who carry vastly different burdens. Some patients are walking. Others cannot leave their beds. Some will recover quickly. Others face months of uncertainty. The hospital ship contains all of them at once, compressed into a world measured not in neighborhoods or cities but in decks, compartments, corridors, and wards. As the days pass, patterns emerge. The same footsteps echo through passageways. The same bells mark changes in routine. The same engines provide a steady vibration beneath every activity. People who have never met begin recognizing one another. Patients learn the faces of nurses who check on them each morning. Medical staff learn which wards require extra attention. Friendships sometimes appear unexpectedly between strangers whose only common experience is the journey itself. The ship develops its own society. Not a permanent one. Not even a stable one. But a community shaped by circumstance, necessity, and motion. Throughout modern warfare, thousands upon thousands of wounded soldiers, sailors, airmen, nurses, civilians, and refugees passed through these floating institutions. Their nationalities varied. Their experiences varied. Their injuries varied. Yet many encountered the same peculiar transition from battlefield disorder to shipboard routine. Some remembered relief. Some remembered boredom. Some remembered fear. Many remembered waiting. Waiting for treatment. Waiting for letters. Waiting for land to appear. Waiting for news. Waiting to learn whether the lives they had known before the war still existed somewhere beyond the horizon. The hospital ship became a place where time behaved differently. Battles often unfolded rapidly. Campaigns advanced and collapsed. Front lines shifted. Entire armies moved across continents. Yet aboard these vessels, life frequently slowed. Recovery demanded patience. Healing resisted schedules. The body followed rhythms indifferent to military timetables. And so while wars accelerated around them, many people aboard hospital ships entered a world governed by observation, endurance, and gradual change. Over the course of this journey, we will move through that world together. We will follow patients arriving from violence into medical order. We will observe the routines that transformed ships into functioning hospitals. We will witness the long periods of uncertainty that accompanied recovery and the difficult transitions awaiting those who eventually departed. Our attention will remain not on battles themselves, but on the people carried away from them. On the nurses moving quietly between beds. On surgeons working beneath electric lights while the sea rolls beyond steel walls. On patients watching horizons through portholes. On the institution that surrounded them all. And on the strange floating communities that emerged wherever healing attempted to keep pace with war. The receiving deck. The first indication of arrival is often sound. Long before a patient sees the ship, he may hear it. Engines carry differently across water than they do across land. Their vibration travels through harbor air, across anchorages, and over crowded transport docks where the wounded wait their turn to move. For some, that distant mechanical rhythm becomes the first suggestion that another stage of the journey is beginning. After days spent in aid stations, field hospitals, railway cars, temporary shelters, or damaged ports, the promise of transfer acquires a significance difficult to explain to anyone who has never depended upon it. A hospital ship rarely appears suddenly. Instead, it grows gradually larger against the horizon. White paint becomes visible first. Then the distinctive markings. Then cranes, decks, lifeboats, and railings. The vessel emerges not as a warship but as something strangely separate from the conflict surrounding it. Even in crowded harbors filled with military traffic, hospital ships possess a different visual language. Their appearance communicates purpose before anyone steps aboard. At the dock, movement begins early. Medical officers consult manifests. Port workers coordinate loading schedules. Ambulances arrive and depart. Stretchers move steadily across gangways. Nurses review lists of incoming patients. Clerks update records that must follow each individual from one institution to the next. The process appears orderly from a distance, yet beneath that order lies an enormous effort to prevent confusion from overwhelming necessity. Each arrival carries a story already in progress. Some patients come directly from battlefields only recently left behind. Others have spent weeks moving through layers of medical care. A sailor burned during a naval engagement may arrive alongside an infantryman wounded months earlier. A civilian evacuated from a combat zone may wait beside an airman recovering from injuries sustained hundreds of miles away. Their experiences differ, yet the ship receives them into the same system. You watch the gangway become a threshold between worlds. On one side stands the uncertainty of transport networks stretched across war. On the other lies an institution designed to stabilize, classify, and care for those passing through it. The crossing itself often lasts only moments. Yet its meaning can feel much larger. A patient carried aboard by stretcher enters an environment governed by different priorities than those that shaped the journey before. Inside the vessel, receiving areas have been organized with careful attention to flow. Corridors must remain clear. Records must remain accurate. Supplies must remain available. Every step in the process exists because someone has already discovered the consequences of neglecting it. War creates enough uncertainty on its own. The institution attempts to remove whatever uncertainty it can. The receiving ward becomes one of the busiest places aboard. Here, newly arrived patients undergo examination. Existing injuries are reviewed. Dressings are inspected. Symptoms are recorded. Decisions are made regarding placement within the ship. Those requiring immediate attention move toward operating facilities. Others are assigned beds within different wards according to condition and anticipated needs. No single moment announces this transformation. There is no ceremony, no formal declaration. Instead, the process unfolds through dozens of small actions repeated hundreds of times. A chart changes hands. A temperature is recorded. A name is confirmed. A stretcher is redirected down one corridor instead of another. Tiny administrative movements accumulate into something larger. Gradually, individuals arriving from chaos become patients integrated into a functioning medical system. The atmosphere aboard remains calm by necessity rather than accident. Panic consumes energy. Confusion wastes time. Noise obscures information. Medical personnel learn to move efficiently without appearing hurried. Their composure serves practical purposes. Patients arriving from traumatic circumstances often search the faces around them for clues about their condition. Calm becomes a form of communication. Near one bulkhead, a nurse updates records while listening to the steady stream of information accompanying each arrival. Age, unit, injury, prior treatment, allergies, symptoms. The details seem endless. Yet every notation contributes to a larger effort to preserve continuity across an enormous wartime medical network. The ship does not function independently. It operates as one link within a chain extending from battlefield aid stations to rehabilitation facilities far beyond the sea. Elsewhere, orderlies maneuver stretchers through passageways designed with efficiency in mind. They learn every turn, every doorway, every incline. Movement aboard a ship differs from movement within a building fixed to the earth. Floors shift subtly beneath each step. The sea imposes its own presence upon every activity. Even on calm days, the vessel reminds its occupants that healing is occurring within a moving world. As morning advances, arrivals continue. Some patients speak quietly with one another. Others remain silent. Exhaustion hangs over many of them like an additional weight. The effort required simply to endure transport can be considerable. Bodies weakened by wounds, illness, or surgery often respond to the ship's relative stability with unexpected relief. For the first time in days, perhaps weeks, certain individuals find themselves in an environment where immediate danger appears more distant than before. Yet relief does not erase uncertainty. Many aboard still know little about what lies ahead. Will additional surgery be required? Will recovery be complete? Will military service continue? Will home remain recognizable when the war finally ends? Such questions rarely receive immediate answers. For now, the institution focuses on more immediate concerns. Pain must be managed. Infections must be prevented. Conditions must be monitored. The future can wait until the present has been secured. Outside, the harbor gradually recedes. Lines are cast off. Engines increase their rhythm. Water begins sliding steadily along the hull. And within the receiving wards, the first stage of transformation continues as the ship carries its newest patients away from one world and toward another. As the shoreline slowly diminishes behind the vessel, the work of classification continues. A hospital ship cannot treat everyone in precisely the same way. However much compassion guides the institution, practical realities remain unavoidable. Different injuries require different forms of care. Different illnesses require different levels of observation. Some patients need surgery. Others need rest. Some are expected to recover quickly. Others may remain under medical supervision for months. The ship must transform a collection of individual circumstances into a system capable of functioning across an ocean. This transformation takes place quietly. The receiving ward seldom resembles the dramatic scenes often associated with wartime medicine. There are no shouted commands echoing endlessly through the corridors. No constant frenzy. Instead, there is concentration. Pens move across paper. Hands adjust bandages. Thermometers are checked. Medical staff pause beside beds to ask questions whose answers may alter the course of treatment. The atmosphere feels closer to careful navigation than emergency response. Every patient represents a course that must be plotted. A young sailor recovering from burns may require entirely different attention than an infantryman suffering from infection. Nearby, a civilian evacuated from a combat zone may carry no visible wounds at all, yet still require observation after weeks of malnutrition and strain. The institution must account for all of them. Its success depends upon recognizing differences without losing sight of the larger whole. You notice how quickly the ship begins teaching its own geography. Patients who can walk gradually learn which passageways lead toward dining areas, which stairwells connect different decks, and which doors remain restricted to medical personnel. At first, every corridor appears identical. Painted metal walls stretch in both directions. Numbered compartments pass by in sequence. Yet familiarity develops surprisingly fast. Human beings have always adapted to enclosed worlds, whether monasteries, remote settlements, military camps, or ships at sea. By the second or third day, many patients can navigate sections of the vessel without assistance. Routine begins creating invisible maps. The sea contributes its own lessons. Some passengers discover quickly that recovery aboard a moving ship differs from recovery on land. Gentle rolling motions accompany every activity. Cups slide slightly across tables if left unattended. Hanging objects sway almost imperceptibly. Even sleep acquires a different rhythm as the vessel rises and falls with distant swells. For those accustomed to maritime life, the motion barely registers. For others, it becomes a constant companion. Medical personnel learn to work within these conditions. A surgeon preparing instruments cannot assume a stable surface. Nurses carrying supplies develop instincts for balance. Orderlies moving stretchers adjust their pace according to weather and sea state. The hospital functions because thousands of small adaptations have accumulated through experience. Procedures evolve. Habits form. Knowledge passes quietly from one generation of medical staff to the next. Beyond the wards, other sections of the ship operate with equal importance. Laundry rooms process mountains of linens. Kitchens prepare meals on schedules that rarely vary. Storage compartments hold medicines, dressings, and equipment whose absence could quickly become critical. Engineers monitor machinery hidden deep within the vessel. Their work receives little attention from patients, yet every light, every sterilizer, Every ventilator depends upon systems maintained far below the waterline. The institution extends well beyond what most people see. A patient lying in bed may experience the ship primarily through nurses, doctors, meals, and the view from a nearby porthole. Beneath that experience lies an intricate network of labor. Hundreds of individuals contribute to the maintenance of an environment where recovery can occur. Their tasks differ greatly, yet all serve the same purpose. As days pass, the receiving ward slowly changes character. The initial surge of arrivals begins to settle. Patients assigned to longer-term care move deeper into the ship's routines. Medical records become more complete. Immediate crises give way to ongoing observation. Staff who first encountered unfamiliar faces now recognize many of them by name. The institution gradually shifts from intake toward maintenance. The transformation is subtle but significant. The ship is no longer simply receiving people. It is beginning to absorb them. Individuals arriving from different battlefields, ports, and hospitals become part of a shared environment. Their days start following similar rhythms. Their experiences begin intersecting in dining areas, passageways, treatment rooms, and wards. A temporary society forms beneath the white-painted decks. Outside, the ocean stretches uninterrupted in every direction. Cloud shadows drift across the water. Wind patterns alter the texture of the sea. Occasionally, another vessel appears on the horizon before disappearing once more into distance. The world beyond the ship remains vast and uncertain. Yet within the hull, order continues asserting itself through repetition. A dressing is changed. A chart is updated. A meal is served. A bed is prepared for a new arrival. And as the vessel moves steadily onward through open water, the first stage of the journey nears completion. The wounded have crossed the threshold. The institution has received them. The routines of care are taking shape. Ahead lies a different condition altogether, one less concerned with arrival than with the long work of sustaining life aboard a floating hospital. The sea continues its patient motion beneath the hull while, deck by deck and ward by ward, the ship settles into the rhythms that will define the days to come. The wards beneath white ceilings. Morning aboard a hospital ship begins long before sunrise. Deep within the vessel, where no porthole offers evidence of approaching daylight, the routines of care continue according to schedules largely indifferent to the position of the sun. The sea may be calm or restless. Clouds may cover the horizon or leave it clear. Few patients know immediately. Their world, for now, is measured by footsteps in passageways, the opening of doors, and the familiar sequence of observations that accompanies each new day. A nurse moves quietly between rows of beds. Small lamps illuminate charts clipped beside patients. Temperatures are recorded. Dressings are inspected. Questions are asked in low voices. Sleep is valuable, but information is valuable too. The body changes constantly during recovery. Improvement and deterioration often announce themselves through details small enough to escape casual notice. The institution depends upon noticing them anyway. The wards possess their own atmosphere. Not silence. Exactly. Hospital ships are never silent. Ventilation systems whisper continuously through ducts hidden behind walls. Metal occasionally responds to the sea with faint creaks. Footsteps emerge and fade beyond partially opened doors. Somewhere farther away, engines maintain their patient rhythm. Yet compared with the violence from which many patients have arrived, the soundscape feels remarkably restrained. The difference is not merely acoustic. It is psychological. Many aboard have spent weeks surrounded by uncertainty. Front lines shifted. Weather interfered with plans. Communications failed. Supplies arrived late. Danger appeared unexpectedly and disappeared just as quickly. Even when no immediate threat existed, the possibility of one often lingered nearby. Inside the ward, that constant vigilance begins to loosen. Not vanish. Not entirely. But loosen. A patient recovering from surgery may find himself sleeping for longer stretches than he has managed in months. Another begins reading books distributed through the ship's modest library. Others spend long periods simply observing the slow passage of time. Recovery often contains more waiting than action. The body performs much of its work quietly, beneath awareness, asking chiefly for patience. You watch the ward gradually awaken. Blankets shift. Conversations begin. A steward distributes breakfast trays with practiced efficiency. Metal utensils clink softly against dishes. Some patients eat eagerly. Others possess little appetite. Medical staff notice both responses. In a hospital environment, ordinary habits frequently become meaningful indicators. Hunger, energy, sleep, discomfort. Each contributes information about the larger process unfolding within the body. The ward resembles a community more than a collection of strangers now. People recognize one another. Names become familiar. Stories emerge gradually. A sailor from a convoy route in the North Atlantic occupies one bed. Nearby rests an infantryman evacuated from a campaign fought under entirely different skies. A civilian survivor of bombardment recovers several rows away. Their paths would likely never have crossed under ordinary circumstances. Yet war has brought them together within this temporary world suspended between departure and arrival. No one knows precisely how long the community will last. Hospital ships are places of continual movement. Patients arrive. Patients depart. Medical personnel rotate through assignments. Ports appear and disappear. The population changes while the institution remains. Even so, patterns of familiarity develop. Human beings are remarkably skilled at creating social worlds from limited circumstances. Shared meals, repeated encounters, and common routines gradually transform anonymity into recognition. People begin asking after one another's progress. A successful surgery becomes known throughout a ward. News of improvement travels quietly from bed to bed. The nurses observe these relationships with interest. Recovery rarely depends solely upon medicine. Morale matters. Companionship matters. The sense that tomorrow may resemble today in positive ways matters. Hospital staff throughout history have recognized this, even when formal medical language lacked precise ways to describe it. Healing occurs within bodies, but it also unfolds within environments. The atmosphere surrounding a patient can influence how the long days of recovery are experienced. By mid-morning, the ship has fully entered its daily rhythm. Orderlies transport supplies through passageways polished by constant use. Laundry carts move between compartments. Medical officers conduct rounds. Reports are reviewed. Decisions are made. The institution resembles a small city whose residents share a single purpose. Yet unlike most cities, this one never stops moving. Beyond steel walls, the sea stretches outward in every direction. Waves rise and fall beneath the hull. Wind alters course across open water. Clouds gather over distant horizons. The world outside changes constantly, though many patients see only fragments of it. Occasionally, someone walks slowly onto a permitted section of deck. The experience can feel unexpectedly profound. Fresh air carries the scent of salt and distance. The horizon appears immense after days spent indoors. Seabirds sometimes accompany the vessel for hours before disappearing. Sunlight reflects from water in patterns too vast to follow. For patients accustomed to enclosed wards, these brief encounters with the open world become memorable parts of the day. Then they return inside. The doors close. The corridors resume. And the routines of the floating hospital continue. As the vessel advances across the sea, the emergency of arrival has faded into something more enduring. The institution is no longer absorbing new patients into its system. It is maintaining them within it. Recovery, observation, treatment, and repetition now shape the days. The ship has become a world unto itself, governed by rhythms that repeat while changing subtly with each passing hour. By afternoon, the pace aboard the ship settles into something that would appear almost ordinary if its circumstances were not so unusual. The operating theaters continue their work. Medicines are distributed according to schedules refined through experience. Charts accumulate new observations. Meals are prepared and served. Cleaning crews move steadily through compartments, wiping surfaces, changing linens, and reducing risks that might otherwise flourish within a crowded environment. Much of the labor remains invisible to patients, yet the stability they experience depends upon these countless acts of maintenance. Hospital ships quickly teach an important lesson about recovery. Healing rarely feels dramatic from the inside. Popular memory often favors decisive moments. The battle, the rescue, the operation, the announcement that danger has passed. Yet most recovery consists of smaller events repeated over long periods. A wound that looks slightly improved. A fever that remains absent for another day. The ability to walk a little farther down a corridor than before. Progress often arrives so gradually that it can only be recognized in retrospect. The medical staff understand this well. A surgeon may perform an operation that occupies only a few hours. The consequences of that operation can require weeks of observation afterward. Nurses spend far more time accompanying recovery than witnessing decisive interventions. Their work exists inside the long middle space between crisis and resolution. You notice how often patience becomes a form of labor. Patients practice it. Doctors practice it. Nurses practice it. Even the institution itself seems organized around patients. The ship does not demand immediate transformation from the people it carries. Instead, it creates conditions under which gradual change becomes possible. In a world shaped by military urgency, this slower rhythm feels almost radical. Weather occasionally interrupts the illusion of permanence. A calm morning may yield to rougher seas by evening. Wind strengthens. Decks become slick with spray. The vessel begins moving with greater force beneath everyone's feet. Objects must be secured more carefully. Walking requires additional attention. Patients confined to bed feel the change through mattresses rising and falling beneath them. The ship remains a hospital. But it is also still a ship. The sea never allows its presence to be forgotten completely. During rough weather, medical staff adapt without complaint. Procedures continue. Meals continue. Rounds continue. Experience has taught them that maritime conditions cannot be treated as interruptions. They are part of the environment itself. The institution survives because it has learned to function within movement rather than despite it. In one ward, a nurse helps a recovering sailor take several careful steps between beds. The distance is short, only a few meters. Yet those meters represent a significant achievement. Nearby patients observe with quiet interest. No celebration follows. None is necessary. Everyone aboard understands the significance of small victories. Elsewhere, a patient receives permission to spend more time on deck. Another has stitches removed. A third learns that an infection appears to be receding. Such developments rarely alter the atmosphere of the ship all at once. Instead, they accumulate gradually, creating subtle shifts in mood. Hope aboard a hospital ship often behaves this way. Not as a sudden revelation, but as a collection of modest improvements observed over time. As evening approaches, the wards begin changing character once again. Activity slows. Daytime routines give way to nighttime ones. Lights are adjusted. Temperatures are checked. Final notes are entered into charts. Conversations grow quieter. Beyond portholes, daylight withdraws from the ocean, leaving only scattered reflections upon darkening water. Some patients welcome the coming night. Sleep remains one of recovery's most valuable companions. Others find darkness more complicated. The absence of activity leaves room for memory. Battlefields return. Burning ships return. Moments of loss return. Many people aboard carry experiences that do not fade simply because they have reached safety. The body may be recovering while the mind continues traveling through older landscapes. Hospital ships provide treatment for wounds that can be measured and observed. Other injuries prove less cooperative. The medical personnel recognize this reality even if the language of their era remains limited. They see patients awakened by dreams. They observe periods of unusual silence. They notice those who spend long stretches staring through portholes toward horizons that reveal nothing. Such observations become part of care as well. Not every wound appears beneath a bandage. Outside, the sea grows darker. The ship's lights glow softly against metal passageways and white-painted ceilings. Engines continue their steady work below deck. Somewhere in the distance, beyond sight and beyond darkness, fleets maneuver, armies march, aircraft fly, and battles unfold according to their own relentless schedules. Here, however, another rhythm prevails. The rhythm of observation. The rhythm of treatment. The rhythm of waiting for the body to accomplish what no amount of urgency can force. And as night settles over the vessel once more, the floating hospital continues its patient voyage through uncertain waters, carrying within its wards hundreds of lives suspended between injury and whatever future awaits beyond the horizon. The operating theatre. Deep within the ship, beyond the wards and away from the open decks, there are places where the sea seems almost forgotten. The operating theatre is one of them. Here, the world narrows. The horizon disappears behind steel walls. The weather becomes distant. The rhythm of waves remains present only as a faint movement beneath the floor, a subtle reminder that even the most controlled environments aboard the vessel still travel through open water. Within these rooms, attention concentrates upon far smaller distances. A pulse. A wound. The steady movement of skilled hands beneath electric light. For many patients, arrival in the operating theatre marks the most uncertain point of the journey. The receiving wards classify and stabilize. The wards themselves provide observation and care. Surgery occupies a different place within the institution. It represents intervention. A moment when recovery depends not upon waiting but upon action. Yet even here, the atmosphere remains remarkably calm. A visitor expecting dramatic urgency might be surprised. The room is orderly. Instruments are arranged carefully. Equipment occupies familiar positions. Staff members move according to routines refined through repetition. Every tray, every table, Every cabinet exists within a system designed to reduce uncertainty wherever possible. War introduces enough unpredictability on its own. The operating theatre attempts to remove it from everything else. Before each procedure begins, preparation dominates the room. Sterilization takes time. Equipment must be checked. Records reviewed. Patients assessed. Surgeons confer quietly with nurses and assistants. Decisions made earlier in receiving wards now acquire practical consequences. Treatments planned on paper become actions performed beneath bright lamps. The institution shifts briefly from observation toward transformation. You watch the room before anyone speaks. A nurse arranges instruments with practiced precision. Another reviews notes attached to a patient's chart. The surgeon stands nearby, not yet working but already thinking through the sequence ahead. Much of medicine involves preparation. Success often depends upon decisions made before the first incision ever occurs. Outside the compartment, life aboard the ship continues unchanged. Meals are served. Beds are changed. Patients walk corridors. Engineers monitor machinery. The operating theatre exists inside the larger institution without replacing it. Even when surgery becomes necessary, the ship remains a community governed by many forms of labor. Hundreds of people continue their work while a handful gather beneath the surgical lights. For patients, the experience can feel profoundly isolating. Recovery in a ward occurs among others. Surgery often requires surrendering control. A person who has spent days surrounded by familiar faces suddenly enters a space governed by procedures, instruments, and expertise. Trust becomes essential. The patient must rely upon people whose knowledge exceeds his own. Such trust rarely appears all at once. It develops gradually, through conversations with nurses, through observations of routine, through evidence that the institution functions as intended. By the time many patients arrive at the operating theatre, they have already spent days witnessing the competence of those around them. The operation becomes one part of a larger relationship rather than an isolated event. The medical staff experience the room differently. For them, familiarity tempers uncertainty. Not because outcomes are guaranteed. They never are. But because routine provides structure. The surgeon knows where instruments will be placed. The nurses know how supplies will be organized. Assistants understand the sequence of procedures. Knowledge accumulated through countless earlier operations creates a framework within which difficult work becomes possible. Hospital ships developed these capabilities because war demanded them. Transport alone was insufficient. Many patients could not simply wait until reaching shore-based hospitals. Conditions evolved. Complications emerged. Emergencies occurred. The vessel required the ability to function as more than a transport platform. It had to become a hospital in the fullest sense of the word. As a result, operating theatres aboard many hospital ships became highly sophisticated environments for their time. Electric lighting illuminated details that daylight could not always provide. Sterilization systems supported complex procedures. Medical stores carried supplies intended not merely for maintenance but for intervention. Surgeons working at sea performed operations that would have been impossible aboard ships only a generation earlier. The achievement was practical rather than dramatic. Progress revealed itself through outcomes. Patients who might once have died survived. Conditions that previously demanded immediate evacuation could be treated during transit. The institution expanded what recovery at sea could mean. By late morning, another procedure begins. The room settles into concentration. Movements become deliberate. Conversation remains minimal. Outside the compartment, the ocean continues rolling beneath the hull, indifferent to the events unfolding within. Yet inside, every action acquires significance. The operating theatre represents one of the places where the ship most clearly fulfills its purpose. Not simply carrying people away from war, attempting to return them to life beyond it. As the days pass, the operating theatre becomes less a place of individual procedures and more a window into the broader responsibilities carried by the ship. Every operation begins with a patient, yet the institution must think in larger terms. Supplies are finite. Personnel are finite. Space is finite. Decisions made in one compartment influence conditions elsewhere aboard. A successful hospital ship depends not only upon medical skill but upon coordination. Hundreds of separate tasks must support one another without drawing attention to themselves. This interconnectedness becomes visible in subtle ways. A surgeon completes an operation, but recovery immediately passes into the hands of ward nurses and attendants. Sterilization teams prepare equipment for future use. Pharmacists monitor inventories. Clerks update records that will follow patients to whatever destination awaits them after disembarkation. No single action exists in isolation. The theatre functions because an entire institution surrounds it. The sea occasionally intrudes upon these calculations. Weather forecasts arrive through naval channels. Wind conditions change. Ocean swells increase. The ship's officers adjust course when necessary. Below deck, medical personnel adapt to whatever conditions accompany the voyage. A rough sea does not suspend illness. Infection does not pause for weather. The work continues. You begin to understand why routine matters so much aboard a hospital ship. Routine is not the opposite of urgency. It is what allows urgency to be managed. Without routine, every challenge becomes a crisis. With routine, even difficult circumstances can be approached methodically. The operating theatre embodies this principle. Its calm atmosphere is not evidence that danger has disappeared. Rather, it reflects years of accumulated knowledge about how danger can be confronted. In one corner of the room, instruments rest beneath carefully arranged coverings. Their appearance is almost ordinary. Metal reflects light softly. Handles show signs of repeated use. Nothing about them suggests heroism or drama. Yet each object represents a tool developed to address human vulnerability. Collectively, they form part of a system whose purpose is profoundly simple: to preserve life when possible, to reduce suffering when preservation proves impossible, to continue trying regardless. The surgeons themselves rarely occupy the center of attention aboard the ship. Popular histories often favor commanding officers, combat leaders, and celebrated figures. Hospital ships generate different kinds of stories. Their most important work frequently occurs away from public view. A successful operation produces no dramatic image visible from a distance. It may result only in a slightly stronger pulse, a reduced fever, or the possibility of recovery weeks later. The institution measures success differently than battlefields do. A military campaign may be evaluated through territory gained or objectives achieved. A hospital evaluates smaller outcomes. One patient able to walk again. Another surviving a dangerous infection. A third recovering enough strength to write letters home. The scale differs, but the significance does not. Afternoons often bring periods of relative quiet. Theaters are cleaned. Equipment is inspected. Medical staff review cases and discuss future treatment plans. These intervals matter as much as the procedures themselves. Reflection allows adaptation. Patterns become visible. Concerns that seemed isolated may reveal broader implications. Knowledge accumulates through observation as much as action. Meanwhile, throughout the wards, the consequences of earlier operations continue unfolding. A patient sleeps more comfortably than before. Another begins physical movement previously impossible. Someone else remains under close observation while recovery proceeds more cautiously. The results of surgery do not announce themselves immediately. They emerge gradually, woven into the longer rhythm of life aboard the ship. As evening approaches, the operating theatre prepares for whatever the next day may bring. No one knows precisely what arrivals await at the next port. No one knows which conditions may require intervention during the voyage ahead. The institution must remain ready for possibilities not yet visible. Preparedness becomes a permanent state rather than a temporary measure. Outside, sunset spreads across the ocean. Golden light briefly reaches portions of the upper decks before fading into deeper colors. Patients fortunate enough to stand near railings watch the horizon darken. Others observe the changing light through portholes. Many never see it at all, occupied instead with recovery, rest, or sleep. Far below those decks, the operating theatre grows quieter. Lights remain on. Equipment remains ready. The room waits. Not passively, but attentively. Its purpose is unchanged by the hour, the weather, or the position of the ship upon the sea. Whenever necessity arrives through the corridors, the theatre will respond. Until then, it exists in a state familiar to much of the vessel. Preparedness, observation, patience. And as darkness gathers once more around the hospital ship, the work of intervention gradually yields to another condition altogether. Beyond surgery, beyond treatment, beyond the routines that sustain recovery, there lies a quieter challenge that cannot be resolved through instruments or procedures alone. The long uncertainty of waiting. Horizons beyond the porthole. Waiting rarely announces itself when it begins. There is no precise hour when recovery becomes anticipation. No formal moment when treatment gives way to wondering what comes next. Instead, the change arrives gradually. A wound stabilizes. A fever recedes. Daily routines become familiar. The immediate concerns that once occupied every conversation begin losing some of their urgency. As physical danger retreats, another condition emerges to fill the space it leaves behind. Thought turns toward the future. The hospital ship remains unchanged on the surface. The same corridors connect the same wards. Nurses continue their rounds. Meals arrive according to schedule. The engines maintain their steady rhythm beneath the decks. Yet the experience of many patients begins shifting in subtle ways. Their attention no longer rests entirely upon survival. Increasingly, it reaches beyond the vessel itself. Toward home. Toward military service. Toward families. Toward questions that no doctor aboard can answer. You see the change most clearly near the portholes. Throughout the ship, certain seats become quietly popular. Patients able to leave their beds sometimes gather near windows overlooking the sea. The view changes little from day to day. Water stretches toward distant horizons. Clouds drift overhead. Occasionally another vessel appears far away before disappearing again. By ordinary standards, there is remarkably little to observe. Yet people continue returning. The horizon offers something the wards cannot. Possibility. Beyond that line lies every destination not yet reached. Every unanswered question. every future still unresolved. For individuals suspended between injury and recovery, the sight of open distance acquires unusual significance. Letters become increasingly important as well. Mail aboard wartime ships follows complicated routes. Deliveries are irregular. Delays are common. Entire journeys may pass without correspondence arriving at all. Nevertheless, people wait for it. A single envelope can alter the atmosphere of an entire day. A letter confirms that someone remains alive, that a home still exists, that familiar places continue despite the disruptions of war. For many patients, written words become bridges connecting the floating world of the hospital ship to lives temporarily left behind. Not every letter brings comfort. Some carry difficult news. Families suffer losses. Homes are damaged. Relationships change. The war reaches far beyond battlefields, touching countless lives that never come near a front line. Patients recovering aboard hospital ships often discover that while their own journey has paused, the world beyond the sea has continued moving. A man who arrived concerned only with survival may now find himself worrying about entirely different matters. Can his farm still operate without him? Will his children recognize him after years away? Does his former occupation still exist? Will recovery restore the life he remembers, or merely deliver him into a new one? The institution cannot resolve such questions. It can provide treatment. It can provide stability. It cannot provide certainty. Medical staff observe these concerns with quiet understanding. They have seen the pattern many times before. Physical healing often reveals psychological burdens previously concealed by more immediate dangers. During crisis, attention narrows. Survival demands focus. Once danger recedes, the mind regains space to wander. It revisits memories. It anticipates futures. It searches for meaning within experiences not easily understood. Hospital ships become places where such reflection naturally occurs. The sea encourages it. Days pass differently aboard a vessel. The horizon remains constant even as destinations change. Movement continues even when individual routines appear repetitive. Time seems both slow and relentless. Many people find themselves thinking in ways they never could amid the noise and urgency of combat. By afternoon, small groups gather in common areas. Conversations drift from medical matters toward broader subjects. People discuss hometowns, occupations, families, places they hope to see again. The discussions remain modest, rarely dramatic. Yet beneath them lies a shared recognition that recovery is not an end point. It is merely preparation for whatever follows. Some patients look forward eagerly. Others appear hesitant. The future promises different things to different people. A sailor awaiting discharge may dream of returning home. Another recovering service member may expect reassignment once fit for duty. A civilian evacuated from a combat zone may not even know whether a home remains to return to. The same horizon contains entirely different meanings depending upon who is observing it. Outside, the ocean continues unfolding beneath changing skies. Morning gray gives way to afternoon blue. Wind alters the shape of waves. Sunlight travels across water in shifting patterns. The sea remains indifferent to human uncertainty. Yet perhaps that indifference carries its own comfort. Long before the war began, these waters existed. Long after it ends, they will remain. The patients watching through portholes rarely articulate such thoughts directly. Still, many continue returning to the windows. Watching. Waiting. allowing the vastness beyond the ship to absorb questions for which no immediate answers exist. And as the vessel advances steadily toward its next destination, the long work of recovery begins sharing space with something equally powerful: expectation. Expectation does not always arrive accompanied by hope. Sometimes it arrives alongside apprehension. The two conditions often travel together. A patient informed that discharge may soon be possible experiences both at once. Recovery has advanced far enough to permit departure from the hospital ship, yet departure introduces its own uncertainties. The routines that once felt restrictive have also become familiar. The faces encountered each day have become recognizable. The institution that first appeared temporary has gradually become a world with its own logic and rhythms. Leaving it can feel unexpectedly difficult. This realization surprises many people. When they first arrive aboard, most focus entirely upon getting better. The ship represents a waypoint rather than a destination. Yet human beings adapt quickly to stable environments. Over time, even a floating hospital crossing wartime oceans can acquire qualities associated with home. Not permanence, certainly, but familiarity. You notice this most clearly during conversations about the future. People rarely discuss only where they are going. They also discuss what they are leaving behind. A patient who spent weeks recovering in the same ward may know the names of nearby nurses. He may recognize the sound of specific footsteps approaching down a corridor. He may understand the daily schedule so completely that he can anticipate events before they occur. These small certainties possess value, especially after prolonged exposure to uncertainty elsewhere. Recovery creates attachments. Not because the environment is ideal, because it is understandable. Outside the ship, wartime life often remains difficult to predict. Military authorities may issue new orders. Transportation schedules may change. Front lines may move. Entire regions may become inaccessible with little warning. The hospital ship cannot eliminate those realities. It can only postpone direct contact with them for a while. Letters continue arriving. Some patients read them repeatedly. Pages become worn at the folds. Familiar sentences acquire new meanings with each reading. In an age before instant communication, written correspondence often carries tremendous emotional weight. Days or weeks may separate the writing of a letter from its arrival. News crosses oceans slowly. Affection travels through paper, ink, and patience. For those aboard, letters serve another purpose as well. They anchor memory. A patient recovering from months of movement between aid stations, hospitals, trains, and ships may possess surprisingly few physical connections to earlier life. Personal belongings are often limited. Uniforms change. Locations blur together. A letter provides continuity. It proves that a world existed before injury and may still exist afterward. Not everyone receives mail. The absence is noticeable. Medical staff understand this too. They observe the subtle differences. One patient unfolds a new letter during breakfast. Another watches quietly from across the room. Human beings compare their circumstances almost instinctively. Even aboard a hospital ship, where survival remains a shared concern, loneliness can persist. The nurses often become witnesses to these quieter struggles. Their responsibilities extend beyond medicine. They listen. They reassure. Sometimes they simply remain present. Many patients remember these moments long after specific treatments have faded from memory. Compassion often leaves impressions more durable than procedures. Years later, Individuals may forget the exact details of an operation while recalling with remarkable clarity the nurse who sat beside them during a difficult evening. As the voyage continues, some patients become stronger. Walking distances increase. Appetites return. Energy slowly rebuilds itself. These developments alter the atmosphere of the wards. Recovery possesses momentum. Once improvement becomes visible, people begin imagining futures more confidently. Conversations shift. The possibility of life beyond the ship feels less abstract than before. Yet not every story follows the same trajectory. Some recoveries progress slowly. Complications emerge. Additional treatment becomes necessary. The hospital ship contains many different timelines unfolding simultaneously. One patient prepares for discharge while another confronts new uncertainty. The institution must accommodate both realities without allowing either to dominate the other. Outside, weather changes again. A low bank of clouds gathers along the horizon. Rain passes across distant stretches of ocean. The vessel continues forward regardless, maintaining its course through conditions that alter daily but rarely stop the voyage. The sea provides a fitting backdrop for the emotional landscape aboard. Calm one day, restless the next, predictable in its unpredictability. By evening, the common rooms grow quieter. Books remain open on laps. Letters are folded and stored carefully. Some patients watch darkness settle beyond the portholes. Others sleep earlier than they once could, exhausted not by injury now but by the slow work of recovery itself. Healing consumes energy even when it appears inactive from the outside. The ship carries them onward, day after day, mile after mile, and gradually, almost without noticing, many patients cross an invisible boundary. They stop measuring time by what happened before arriving aboard. They begin measuring it by what may happen after departure. The institution has succeeded in one of its most important tasks. It has made the future imaginable again. Yet imagining the future and entering it are not the same thing. Ahead waits another transition, one that will alter the population of the ship, reshape its temporary communities, and remind everyone aboard that even floating worlds devoted to healing cannot remain unchanged forever. Names on the departure list. The first sign of departure often appears on paper. A list is posted. A chart receives an annotation. A conversation occurs between medical staff beside a ward desk. Nothing dramatic announces the change. Yet within the quiet routines of the ship, such moments carry considerable significance. They indicate that recovery has advanced far enough for a patient to move beyond the institution that has sustained it. For some, the news arrives with relief. For others, with hesitation. Most experience some combination of both. The hospital ship has never been intended as a permanent destination. Everyone aboard understands this in principle. Still, principles often feel different when they become personal realities. The possibility of departure remains abstract until a specific name appears beside a specific date. Then the future acquires weight. A patient who has spent weeks recovering in the same ward may suddenly find himself counting remaining days. Familiar routines begin taking on a different character. The morning rounds continue. Meals arrive as usual. The engines maintain their steady vibration beneath the decks. Yet everything now exists within the awareness that it will soon end. You watch this awareness spread gradually through the wards. One patient receives transfer orders. Another learns that transportation has been arranged. A third is informed that rehabilitation facilities await at the next port. The departures rarely occur all at once. Instead, They unfold steadily, altering the composition of the ship in small increments. Beds that remained occupied for weeks become empty. New arrivals eventually fill them. The institution continues, even as individuals pass through it. The process resembles the sea itself. Water flows constantly, yet the ocean remains. Patients come and go. The ship remains. This continuity forms part of the hospital ship's peculiar identity. Unlike a hometown or military unit, its community is always temporary. Relationships develop knowing they will eventually end. Friendships emerge despite the certainty of separation. People learn one another's stories while understanding that those stories will soon continue elsewhere. Such awareness lends even ordinary interactions a certain quality. A conversation during breakfast may be one of the last. An evening spent watching the horizon may not be repeated. A nurse performing routine observations may soon transfer responsibility to someone entirely different. No formal farewell is required for these realities to be felt. The staff experience departures differently. For them, turnover is constant. A nurse may care for dozens of patients during a single voyage. Some remain aboard only briefly. Others occupy the same bed for extended periods. Medical personnel learn to invest themselves in recovery while accepting the temporary nature of their relationships with those they treat. This balance is not always easy. Human connection develops naturally through repeated contact. A nurse who has monitored a patient's progress for weeks cannot remain entirely indifferent to the outcome. A surgeon who performed a difficult operation often wonders how recovery ultimately unfolds. Yet the institution requires movement. New patients arrive. New needs emerge. Attention shifts accordingly. The hospital ship teaches a particular form of attachment. Care without possession. Concern without permanence. The work continues because it must. As departure dates approach, practical preparations begin. Records are reviewed. Instructions are provided. Transportation arrangements are confirmed. Medical summaries accompany patients so that future caregivers understand what has occurred aboard the vessel. The administrative effort behind every discharge remains largely invisible, yet it is essential. Recovery does not end at the gangway. The ship forms only one stage within a much larger journey. Many patients spend more time on deck during these final days. The horizon that once represented uncertainty now suggests arrival. Land will appear eventually. Ports will emerge from distance. New institutions will assume responsibility. The future remains unknown, but it is no longer abstract. It has acquired a destination. Some stand quietly beside railings, watching the sea pass beneath them. Others write letters. Some simply observe the routines continuing around them. The same nurses move through corridors. The same meals arrive. The same engines carry the vessel onward. Yet familiarity itself now feels different. People often notice ordinary things most clearly when they know they are about to leave them behind. Evening settles across the ship. Lights glow softly through passageways. The wards remain calm. Names continue appearing on departure lists. And little by little, the floating community that formed beneath white ceilings and steel decks begins preparing for its next transformation. The institution has guided many of its patients from crisis toward recovery. Now it must help them cross another threshold entirely. From waiting toward whatever awaits beyond the harbor. The day land appears often begins like any other. Breakfast is served. Charts are reviewed. Nurses conduct their rounds. The ship continues moving with the same steady rhythm that has governed life aboard for weeks. Yet gradually, word spreads through the wards. Someone has spotted the coastline. A harbor lies ahead. The long stretch of open water is nearing its conclusion. Patients who are able make their way toward viewing areas. The reaction is rarely dramatic. There are no crowds rushing toward railings. No celebrations. Instead, there is observation. People look. They remain quiet. The sight of land carries different meanings for everyone aboard. For some, it represents home. For others, another hospital. For many, it signifies only the next stage of a journey whose final destination remains uncertain. Yet regardless of what lies ahead, the coastline confirms that movement has occurred. Days of waiting, treatment, recovery, and reflection have carried the ship somewhere tangible. You watch distant shapes slowly become recognizable. A shoreline emerges from haze. Buildings appear. Harbor structures resolve themselves from indistinct silhouettes into physical objects. Tugboats move across sheltered water. The world beyond the ship grows increasingly detailed with every passing hour. What was once imagined now becomes visible. Inside the wards, preparations continue. Luggage is gathered. Documents are checked. Patients scheduled for departure receive final instructions. Medical personnel review medications, recommendations, and records. The process is orderly because it has been repeated countless times before. Hospital ships have always existed within larger networks. Their purpose depends upon successful transitions from one institution to another. Still, efficiency does not eliminate emotion. Some patients feel eager to leave. Others feel unexpectedly reluctant. The floating hospital has occupied a unique place in their lives. It was never home in the traditional sense. Yet it became the location where pain diminished, strength returned, and uncertainty slowly became manageable. Leaving such a place often produces mixed feelings. The nurses understand this. Many have witnessed the same pattern repeatedly. Patients who spent weeks longing for departure sometimes become unusually reflective during their final days aboard. Recovery changes relationships with environments. A ward that once felt confining may later feel reassuring. The passageway walked countless times becomes familiar. Even the sounds of engines beneath the deck acquire certain comfort through repetition. Human beings attach themselves not only to places, but to routines. Departure interrupts those routines. As the harbor grows larger beyond the portholes, final farewells begin occurring in quiet ways. A patient thanks a nurse who cared for him during difficult nights. Another shakes hands with an orderly who helped him learn to walk again. A few exchange addresses, uncertain whether correspondence will ever follow. Most simply acknowledge one another with brief words carrying more meaning than their length suggests. The hospital ship has always been a temporary world. Its residents understand this. Yet temporary worlds can still matter deeply. By midday, gangways are prepared. Dock workers wait ashore. Vehicles stand ready to transport patients toward whatever destinations have been arranged for them. The institution has completed its portion of the journey. Others will continue the work. One by one, departures begin. A stretcher moves carefully toward the exit. A recovering patient walks slowly but independently. Another pauses briefly before stepping across the gangway, turning for a final glance at the vessel that carried him through an uncertain chapter of life. Such moments are easy to miss amid the practical demands of disembarkation. Yet they occur nonetheless, woven quietly into the flow of movement between ship and shore. Outside, Harbor activity surrounds the vessel. Cargo cranes move in the distance. Ferries cross nearby waters. Workers go about tasks unrelated to the hospital ship entirely. Life continues beyond the institution's boundaries. The contrast can feel striking. Weeks spent within a carefully structured environment suddenly give way to the complexity of the wider world. For those remaining aboard, the departures create noticeable changes. Beds become empty. Voices disappear. Entire sections of a ward grow quieter. The community shifts once again. New arrivals may eventually occupy those spaces, but they will bring different experiences, different concerns, different futures. The social landscape of the ship never remains fixed for long. By evening, many of the day's departures are complete. The harbor lights begin reflecting across calm water. Some patients remain aboard. Others are already traveling inland. Medical staff finish paperwork and prepare for the next stage of the voyage. The institution pauses briefly before resuming its continuous cycle of reception, treatment, recovery, and transfer. Outside, darkness returns gradually to the sea. The coastline glows faintly in the distance. And aboard the hospital ship, another realization settles quietly over those who remain. Recovery has not ended. The voyage has not ended. Yet something important has changed. The future that once existed only beyond the horizon has begun arriving, one name at a time, through the steady and unremarkable process of departure. The empty bed and the new arrival. An empty bed never remains empty for long. By the morning after a major disembarkation, signs of transition are already visible throughout the ship. Fresh linens have been fitted. Equipment has been inspected and returned to its proper place. Medical records associated with former occupants have moved onward through administrative channels. The physical evidence of departure begins disappearing almost immediately. The institution has learned not to linger. Its purpose depends upon continuity. While some patients travel inland toward rehabilitation centers, hospitals, or homes, others are already moving toward the ship from entirely different directions. Somewhere beyond the harbor, ambulances travel familiar roads. Trains carry the wounded toward ports. Smaller vessels transfer patients from naval facilities. The larger network remains active. The hospital ship forms only one part of a system that never fully rests. You notice the change first in the receiving areas. The same corridors that recently guided departing patients now welcome arrivals. Nurses review new documentation. Medical officers conduct examinations. Orderlies move stretchers through passageways that seem unchanged despite the constant flow of lives passing through them. The institution resumes a process that has become almost cyclical. Yet the people are different. Every arrival brings a new history aboard. A man injured in circumstances entirely unrelated to those who departed yesterday may soon occupy the same bed. A civilian evacuated from a threatened region may recover beside military personnel. A sailor rescued from a damaged vessel may find himself entering a ward recently vacated by someone returning home. The ship preserves continuity while continually renewing itself. The process can feel strangely impersonal from a distance. One name replaces another. One chart follows the next. One patient departs. Another arrives. Yet viewed more closely, the reality becomes more complex. The institution does not treat individuals as interchangeable. Rather, it has developed routines capable of accommodating endless variation. Every new arrival enters a structure designed to adapt itself around unique needs. This adaptability explains much of the ship's success. War rarely produces uniform circumstances. Injuries differ. Illnesses differ. Personal histories differ. The hospital ship survives because its routines are stable enough to provide order while remaining flexible enough to respond to change. Within the wards, the effects of turnover become increasingly visible. A patient who arrived weeks earlier may now find himself surrounded by unfamiliar faces. Conversations begin again. Introductions occur. Stories emerge gradually. The social world aboard the ship reorganizes itself with each new group of arrivals. At first, the process can feel repetitive. The same questions return. Where are you from? How long have you been aboard? What happened? What comes next? Yet repetition does not eliminate meaning. Human beings remain curious about one another even under difficult circumstances. Shared environments encourage shared understanding. Before long, strangers become acquaintances. Acquaintances become companions. The cycle begins anew. The nurses occupy a unique position within this continual renewal. Unlike many patients, they remain aboard through multiple waves of arrivals and departures. They witness patterns invisible to those passing through only once. They see how quickly wards change, how frequently familiar faces disappear, how often uncertainty arrives wearing different uniforms, speaking different accents, and carrying different stories. The institution teaches them a broad perspective. No single patient represents the entire war. No single journey defines the ship. The vessel serves countless individual experiences without becoming centered upon any one of them. Outside, the harbor eventually recedes once more. Lines are cast off. Engines resume their familiar rhythm. The coastline diminishes behind the stern. Another voyage begins. For newly arrived patients, everything feels unfamiliar. The corridors, the schedules, the faces, the subtle motion of the ship beneath their feet. Many remain focused on immediate concerns. Pain, fatigue, confusion. Recovery has not yet become routine for them. For longer-term occupants, however, the patterns are recognizable. They know where the passageways lead. They know when meals will arrive. They know which sounds belong to ordinary operations and which suggest something unusual. Experience aboard the ship creates its own form of knowledge. Not expertise, exactly, but familiarity. The coexistence of newcomers and veterans produces an interesting atmosphere. One group is entering a world the other already understands. Advice is exchanged. Questions are answered. Small reassurances pass between people who share little except temporary residence aboard the same vessel. The community reforms itself through countless such interactions. By afternoon, the wards feel settled once more. Not identical to before. Never identical. But stable. The ship has absorbed another transition. Departure has given way to arrival. Absence has given way to presence. And as the vessel moves steadily across open water once again, the cycle of care continues, carrying forward an institution built not around permanence, but around the patient management of continual change. As the voyage continues, the contrast between newcomers and longer-term patients becomes one of the defining features of life aboard the ship. The difference is visible in small details. A newly arrived patient may pause at an intersection of corridors, uncertain which direction leads back to the ward. Someone who has spent several weeks aboard passes by without hesitation. A nurse explaining routine procedures may encounter questions she has answered many times before. The questions are new to the person asking them. The institution exists in both states simultaneously, familiar and unfamiliar, predictable and uncertain. This coexistence creates a constantly shifting perspective on recovery. Those who arrived recently often measure time backward. They think about where they came from. The battlefield, the aid station, the transport convoy, the damaged ship, the hurried evacuation. Their memories remain close to the surface because little time has passed since those experiences occurred. Longer-term patients increasingly measure time forward. They think about discharge, future treatment, family, work, home. The difference is subtle, yet important. Two people may occupy neighboring beds while living within entirely different emotional landscapes. The nurses move between both worlds. Part of their work involves helping newly arrived patients adapt to the routines of the vessel. Another part involves preparing longer-term patients for eventual departure. They function as guides through a process that repeats endlessly while remaining deeply personal for each individual experiencing it. You begin to notice how much of the ship's atmosphere depends upon continuity. The same uniforms appear day after day. The same procedures are followed. The same meal schedules return with reassuring regularity. This consistency matters. It provides stability within circumstances that might otherwise feel overwhelming. For patients whose lives have been disrupted by injury, illness, displacement, or loss, predictable routines become a form of reassurance. Not because routines solve every problem, because they make problems easier to endure. Beyond the wards, the vessel continues functioning through countless acts of maintenance. Engineers inspect machinery. Laundry crews process linens. Cooks prepare meals. Medical stores are inventoried. Communication officers send and receive messages linking the ship to ports, hospitals, and naval authorities scattered across vast distances. Much of this labor remains invisible to patients, yet it forms the foundation upon which everything else depends. Hospital ships often appear calm because so much effort is invested in preserving that calm. The achievement is organizational as much as medical. It requires foresight, discipline, coordination. People performing tasks correctly even when those tasks attract little attention. As evening approaches, some patients gather on deck. The weather is favorable. The sea is relatively calm. Sunlight spreads across the water in long bands of gold and silver before gradually fading toward dusk. Conversation drifts between practical subjects and personal memories. The atmosphere remains subdued. No one speaks loudly. The ocean seems to encourage quieter voices. One man describes a hometown harbor. Another recalls a childhood spent near mountains. Someone else speaks about a family member waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. These conversations are not extraordinary. That is precisely what makes them important. War often narrows attention toward immediate concerns. Recovery slowly widens it again. People begin thinking about ordinary life, ordinary places, ordinary hopes. The return of such thoughts can be as meaningful as any medical milestone. Meanwhile, newly arrived patients continue adapting to the ship. The first days remain difficult for some. Pain lingers. Sleep remains inconsistent. Uncertainty persists. Yet they are now entering a process already familiar to those around them. Others have walked the same corridors, sat beside the same portholes, wondered the same things about the future. The institution offers no guarantees, but it does offer examples. Recovery is visible. Not everywhere. Not for everyone. but visible enough. Night settles slowly over the ocean. Lights appear within the wards. The decks grow quieter. The sea darkens until it once again becomes difficult to distinguish from the sky. Far below, engines continue their steady labor. Above, stars emerge where clouds permit them. The hospital ship moves onward through darkness as it has countless nights before. Around it stretches an immense world still shaped by war. Within it exists a smaller world shaped by care. Patients arrive. Patients depart. Beds empty and fill. Names enter records and leave them again. Yet the institution endures, carrying forward a purpose that remains unchanged despite the continual flow of lives passing through its corridors. And gradually, as one voyage blends into the next, another transformation begins unfolding beneath the surface of routine. The ship is no longer simply a place where people recover. It is becoming a place where memory itself begins to change shape. The weight of memory. Memory behaves differently at sea. On land, the world offers constant reminders of where a person is. Roads continue toward familiar destinations. Buildings remain fixed in place. Landscapes preserve their shapes from one day to the next. Even when circumstances are difficult, the environment provides reference points against which experience can be measured. The ocean offers fewer such anchors. The horizon changes constantly while appearing unchanged. The ship moves forward without leaving visible traces behind it. Days blend together through repetition. In such conditions, memory often grows more active. For many patients, this change begins quietly. The immediate concerns of arrival have faded. Treatment routines are familiar. Recovery progresses according to its own pace. The mind, no longer occupied entirely by survival, begins revisiting earlier chapters of the journey. A sailor lying awake before dawn remembers the sound of metal striking metal during a battle at sea. An infantryman recalls the smell of wet earth after rain in a distant field. A civilian thinks about streets that may no longer exist in the form he remembers them. These recollections arrive unexpectedly. A particular sound in the corridor. A certain quality of light through a porthole. A phrase overheard during conversation. The smallest detail can open a pathway into the past. You notice how often people stare toward the ceiling while remembering. The body remains within the ward. The mind travels elsewhere. Hospital ships occupy a peculiar position between experience and reflection. During moments of crisis, there is often little opportunity to think beyond immediate necessity. Decisions must be made. Actions must be taken. Attention narrows naturally toward whatever threatens survival. Recovery creates space. And space invites memory. The nurses observe this process frequently. A patient who seemed cheerful during the day becomes unusually quiet in the evening. Another spends long periods staring through a porthole after receiving a letter from home. Someone else begins telling stories about earlier experiences with a level of detail that surprises even himself. Such moments are not necessarily signs of distress. Often they represent something simpler. The mind attempting to place recent events within a larger understanding of life. Human beings have always done this. War merely provides more difficult material with which to work. Throughout the wards, memory takes many forms. Some patients speak openly. Others remain private. A few write letters or keep journals, preserving observations they fear may otherwise disappear. Paper becomes a companion to reflection. Words offer structure where emotions often remain uncertain. Many people discover that experiences difficult to explain aloud become slightly easier to understand once written down. Not every memory concerns war directly. This surprises some observers. When given time to reflect, patients frequently think as much about ordinary life as extraordinary events. They remember family meals, seasonal routines, familiar streets, the sound of church bells, the appearance of local harbors, the smell of workshops, farms, schools, and homes. Recovery reconnects people to the parts of themselves that existed before injury. The process is gradual. A person who arrived aboard defined primarily by a wound begins recovering older identities. Father, daughter, carpenter, teacher, student, fisherman, clerk, neighbor. The hospital ship helps facilitate this transition, even if unintentionally. By creating distance from immediate danger, it allows broader questions of identity to re-emerge. Outside, weather changes once again. A layer of cloud settles across the sky. Rain passes intermittently over the sea. Water strikes the portholes in soft patterns before sliding away. The ocean adopts a muted grey color stretching toward every horizon. Inside the wards, the atmosphere grows reflective. The weather encourages it. The sea encourages it. The slow pace of recovery encourages it. Many patients spend long stretches reading, writing, or simply thinking. Activity continues throughout the ship, yet the emotional tone shifts subtly. Earlier chapters of the voyage focused upon treatment, adaptation, and anticipation. Now another condition has begun asserting itself. Interpretation. People are not merely recovering from events. They are attempting to understand them. And as rain drifts across the open water and the ship continues its steady passage through uncertain seas, memories long postponed begin surfacing with increasing clarity, asking questions that no medical chart can fully answer. The effort to understand experience rarely follows a straight path. Memory moves in circles. A patient may spend days thinking about home only to find his thoughts returning suddenly to a battlefield. Another may focus on recovery for weeks before a familiar smell, a passing remark, or the sound of distant machinery awakens recollections that seemed dormant. The mind revisits important moments repeatedly, examining them from different angles as circumstances change. The hospital ship provides an unusual setting for this process. Life aboard contains enough routine to create stability, yet enough distance from ordinary life to encourage reflection. Patients exist between worlds. They are no longer fully immersed in the events that brought them here, but neither have they fully returned to the lives that preceded them. This intermediate state creates opportunities for contemplation that many never anticipated. You see it in the conversations that unfold during long afternoons. The subjects remain varied. Some discuss military service. Others speak about families. Many tell stories that begin far from war altogether. Childhood memories emerge. Descriptions of hometown festivals. Recollections of seasonal work. The details often appear insignificant at first. Yet beneath them lies a common impulse. People are rebuilding continuity. They are connecting recent hardship to the larger narratives of their lives. The process matters. War has a tendency to compress identity. A person becomes a casualty, a patient, a survivor, a service member. Such labels serve practical purposes, but they rarely capture the complexity of individual lives. Recovery allows broader identities to return. The wounded sailor becomes someone who also enjoys music. The recovering infantryman becomes someone who once studied engineering. The civilian evacuee becomes someone who remembers a favorite street corner from childhood. The hospital ship witnesses these recoveries as surely as it witnesses physical healing. Medical staff often recognize the signs. A patient begins discussing future plans. Another resumes old hobbies when circumstances permit. Someone requests books related to a profession left behind. Such moments suggest that attention is shifting beyond immediate concerns. The future is becoming imaginable not merely as survival, but as life. Not every memory is comforting. Certain recollections remain difficult. Loss cannot always be softened through distance. Many aboard carry knowledge that particular friends, relatives, or comrades will never return. Others remain uncertain about people from whom they have been separated. Absence occupies its own place within memory. It shapes thoughts even when no words are spoken aloud. The nurses encounter this reality frequently. Sometimes their role is practical. Sometimes it is simply human. A conversation beside a bed. A few moments spent listening. An acknowledgement that grief exists even in places dedicated to healing. Hospital ships treat bodies, but they cannot entirely separate themselves from the emotional consequences of war. Those consequences travel aboard with every patient. Outside, the weather gradually improves. Clouds begin breaking apart. Sunlight returns in brief intervals, illuminating sections of ocean that moments earlier appeared uniformly gray. The changing light alters the atmosphere throughout the ship. Corridors brighten. Wards feel less enclosed. Patients gather near windows to watch the sea regain its color. The transformation is modest. Yet it affects people. Human beings respond to light in ways both obvious and subtle. After days of overcast skies, even a short appearance of sunlight can change how a space feels. The hospital ship remains the same vessel. The wards remain the same wards. Yet the environment acquires a different mood. By evening, the sea reflects scattered gold beneath clearing skies. Some patients remain on deck longer than usual, reluctant to return indoors. Others sit beside portholes, watching the horizon fade into twilight. The conversations are quieter now. Not solemn. Simply thoughtful. Reflection has become part of the voyage. No one schedules it. No institution requires it. It emerges naturally from the circumstances of recovery. The body heals according to biological rhythms. The mind follows rhythms of its own. Both require time. As darkness settles once more across the ocean, the ship continues carrying its passengers through that process. Around them, the war still exists. Armies still maneuver. Fleets still sail. Aircraft still cross contested skies. Yet aboard this vessel, another kind of work unfolds. The work of remembering. The work of understanding. The work of gradually transforming experience into something that can be carried forward. And as the engines maintain their patient rhythm beneath the decks, the hospital ship moves steadily onward toward the final stage of its journey, where recovery, memory, and expectation will begin giving way to something quieter still. Aftermath. The shore beyond recovery. The final stage of a voyage rarely feels final while it is happening. Life aboard the hospital ship continues much as before. Breakfast arrives. Rounds are conducted. Charts are updated. The engines maintain their familiar vibration beneath the decks. For those living within the institution, each day resembles the one before it closely enough that change can become difficult to notice. Yet beneath the repetition, movement continues. Distances shrink. Destinations approach. Journeys that once seemed indefinite begin acquiring shape. The signs are subtle at first. More discussions concern future arrangements. Medical reviews focus increasingly upon transfer plans. Patients speak less about treatment and more about what follows treatment. Recovery remains important, but attention gradually shifts beyond it. The institution has spent weeks guiding people away from crisis. Now it begins preparing them for life outside its boundaries. You notice how often maps appear. Not formal navigation charts. Personal maps. Mental maps. People trace routes toward places they hope to reach. A rehabilitation center in one city. Family waiting in another. A home not seen in years. Even those whose futures remain uncertain often imagine directions rather than destinations. The act of looking ahead becomes part of recovery itself. The nurses hear these conversations repeatedly. Some are practical. Others are speculative. A patient wonders whether his old occupation remains possible. Another discusses schooling interrupted by military service. Someone else speaks about returning to a town that may have changed dramatically during the war. The details differ, but the underlying question remains remarkably consistent. What kind of life exists after this? The hospital ship cannot answer. No institution can. It can only help people reach the point where the question becomes possible. This achievement is easily overlooked. Histories often emphasize dramatic moments. Battles. Operations. Political decisions. Yet much of human experience unfolds in quieter transitions. A person moving from illness toward health. From uncertainty toward possibility. From survival toward ordinary life. Such changes rarely attract headlines, but they shape countless lives. Hospital ships occupied precisely this territory. They existed between chapters. Between danger and recovery. Between one world and another. Their significance often lay not in what occurred aboard them, but in what became possible afterward. Outside, the sea appears calmer than it has in days. Long swells roll beneath the hull with measured patience. Sunlight stretches across the water. The horizon remains distant, yet it no longer feels endless. Experience aboard the vessel has altered how many patients perceive distance itself. When they first arrived, the future often seemed unreachable. Now it appears merely unresolved. The distinction matters. An unreachable future inspires little action. An unresolved future invites preparation. Throughout the wards, small acts of preparation continue. Letters are written. Addresses are exchanged. Personal belongings are organized. Medical instructions are reviewed once more. None of these activities appear especially significant on their own. Together, however, they signal a broader transformation. People are gradually turning their attention outward. Toward shore. Toward family. Toward work. Toward uncertainty of a different kind. The community aboard the ship feels this shift as well. Relationships formed during recovery remain meaningful, yet everyone understands their temporary nature. Some individuals may never meet again after disembarkation. Others might exchange letters for years. Most simply continue their journeys in separate directions. The institution accepts this without resistance. It was never designed to keep people together. Its purpose has always been movement. Movement away from suffering when possible. Movement toward care. Movement toward whatever comes next. As afternoon light fills the wards, the atmosphere acquires a curious balance between gratitude and anticipation. Many patients recognize how far they have traveled since arrival. Yet few dwell upon the past for long. Increasingly, Their attention belongs to the future. The sea continues sliding past the hull. The engines continue their steady work. And beyond the horizon, somewhere still unseen, the next chapter waits patiently for those approaching it. As the voyage draws closer to its conclusion, the ship itself seems to occupy a different place in the imagination of those aboard. When many patients first arrived, the vessel appeared as a destination, a refuge, a place of treatment, a place where immediate needs might finally be addressed after long periods of uncertainty. The hospital ship represented an answer to urgent problems. Safety compared with what had come before. Stability compared with chaos. Now, for many, it has become something else. A bridge. Its importance has not diminished. If anything, it has deepened. The difference lies in perspective. The ship is no longer viewed primarily as the place where recovery occurs. It is remembered increasingly as the place through which recovery became possible. A chapter rather than a conclusion. A passage rather than an endpoint. You notice this shift during conversations between patients who have spent many weeks aboard. They speak less about the routines of the ship itself and more about how those routines change them. The daily rounds that once felt repetitive become evidence of steady care. The corridors walked countless times become markers of regained strength. Even the constant vibration of the engines acquires meaning, associated not merely with movement through water but with movement through a difficult period of life. The institution remains physically unchanged. The interpretation changes. This is often how memory works. Places acquire significance gradually. Only after leaving them behind do people fully understand what they represented. The nurses and medical staff experience something similar, though from a different angle. They witness departures repeatedly. One group leaves. Another arrives. The cycle continues. Yet even amid such constant turnover, certain individuals remain memorable. Not because their stories are more important than others, but because human relationships naturally leave impressions. A patient who struggled through a long recovery. Someone whose optimism influenced an entire ward. Another whose quiet determination became familiar to everyone around him. Care leaves traces on both sides. The institution teaches this lesson repeatedly. Outside, signs of approaching land become more frequent. Fishing vessels appear occasionally on the horizon. Birds accompany the ship for longer periods. The color of the water changes subtly as coastal conditions replace the deeper patterns of the open sea. Experienced sailors notice these details instinctively. Others simply sense that the voyage is entering a different phase. The sea remains vast. Yet it no longer feels infinite. By evening, many patients gather on deck. The weather is mild. The air carries the familiar scent of salt, though now it mingles occasionally with faint traces of land carried outward by shifting winds. No announcement is necessary. People understand that the journey is nearing completion. Some stand quietly at the railings. Others sit and watch the horizon. Conversations drift between memories of the voyage and speculation about what lies ahead. There is no collective conclusion, no shared revelation. Each person interprets the experience differently. The hospital ship has carried hundreds of lives through the same waters while delivering them toward vastly different futures. Yet a common thread remains. The voyage changed them. Not always dramatically. Often in small ways. A renewed appreciation for ordinary routines. A greater awareness of fragility. A deeper understanding of patience. The lessons vary from person to person, but few leave entirely unchanged. As darkness settles across the ocean, lights begin appearing far in the distance. At first they seem like stars. Then they reveal themselves as something else. A coastline. A harbor. Evidence of human life waiting beyond the sea. The sight carries a quiet power. For weeks, the horizon has represented possibility without form. Now possibility begins acquiring shape. The future remains uncertain, but it is no longer invisible. It glows faintly beyond the darkness, inviting attention without revealing every detail. The ship continues forward, steady, patient, faithful to its purpose. Around it, the water reflects scattered lights from shore. Above it, stars emerge where clouds permit. Between sea and sky, the vessel advances through one of the oldest transitions in human experience. From one chapter of life into another. And as the coastline grows clearer with each passing mile, the long journey of recovery begins yielding to something quieter and more enduring. The realization that survival itself is not the destination. It is the beginning of whatever comes next. The ship is gone now. The voyage has ended. The gangways have been lowered and raised again countless times. Patients have departed. New passengers have arrived. Paint has faded beneath years of salt and weather. Engines that once carried wounded men and women across uncertain seas have long since fallen silent. Some hospital ships were converted to other purposes. Others were dismantled. Many survive today only in photographs, official records, and fading memories carried by those who once stepped aboard them. Yet certain places linger long after they disappear. Not because of what they looked like. Because of what they meant. The hospital ship occupied a peculiar position within the history of conflict. It was neither battlefield nor home. Neither beginning nor end. It existed between. A floating interval in which the ordinary expectations of life were temporarily suspended. People arrived carrying injuries, fears, hopes, questions, and memories. They departed carrying many of those same things. Yet something had changed. Time had been given. Care had been given. Distance had been given. And sometimes those gifts proved as important as any medicine. You can imagine the sea tonight much as it was then. Dark water stretching toward unseen horizons. Wind moving across the surface. Clouds gathering and dispersing according to rhythms older than any war. The ocean that carried hospital ships through the 20th century remains largely unchanged. It continues breathing beneath moonlight. Continues receiving rain. Continues reflecting sunlight across vast distances. The conflicts have passed. The sea remains. Perhaps this explains why maritime journeys occupy such a powerful place within memory. A voyage creates separation. Shorelines fall away. Familiar landmarks disappear. The world becomes simpler for a time. Water, sky, motion, distance. Human beings often discover things about themselves in such environments that remain hidden amid the noise of ordinary life. The patients aboard hospital ships experience this in ways they never intended. Few would have chosen the circumstances that brought them there. Yet within the enforced stillness of recovery, many encountered something increasingly rare during wartime. Time to think. Time to remember. Time to imagine futures not entirely defined by survival. The institution itself reflected a quiet contradiction at the heart of human history. War requires enormous effort to destroy. Hospitals require enormous effort to preserve. The two often exist side by side. One creates wounds. The other attempts to heal them. Neither effort is simple. Neither effort is free from difficulty. Yet the existence of hospital ships reminds us that even amid humanity's capacity for violence, there has always existed a parallel determination to care for the vulnerable. Not perfectly, not universally, but persistently, again and again, across oceans and generations. A nurse adjusting a blanket beneath electric light. A surgeon preparing instruments while waves roll beyond steel walls. An engineer maintaining power systems deep within the hull. A cook preparing meals for patients he may never meet. The work rarely appeared heroic in the conventional sense. It was repetitive, practical, often unnoticed. Yet entire recoveries depended upon it. History frequently remembers battles because they change maps. It remembers political leaders because they influence nations. It remembers victories and defeats because they provide clear narratives. The hospital ship belonged to a different category of memory. Its purpose was not conquest. Its purpose was continuity. To carry people from one chapter to another. To create conditions in which healing might occur. To preserve possibilities that otherwise could have been lost. And perhaps that is why these vessels continue to occupy such a distinctive place in the historical imagination. They remind us that survival is rarely a single moment. More often, it is a process. A long accumulation of small acts. A dressing changed. A fever monitored. A letter delivered. A meal served. A patient encouraged to take a few more steps down a corridor. The grand narratives of history often unfold through such humble details, though they are easy to overlook from a distance. Now the sea grows quieter. The harbor lights have faded. The ship exists only as memory. Yet somewhere, perhaps in a museum archive, a family photograph, or an old journal written during recovery, traces remain. A name recorded on a passenger list. A note sent home. A recollection shared decades later. Evidence that for a brief period, amid one of history's most turbulent eras, a floating world carried people through uncertainty toward whatever future awaited them beyond the horizon. And perhaps that is the final image worth keeping. Not the battle. Not the wound. Not even the ship itself. But the horizon. A line separating what is known from what is still approaching. For those aboard the hospital ship, that horizon often represented recovery. Sometimes it represented home. Sometimes it represented an entirely new life waiting beyond the sea. It remained uncertain. Yet they sailed toward it anyway. The ocean accepted their reflections without judgment. The sky stretched above them without answer. And the ship continued forward, patient and steady, carrying fragile human hopes through dark water toward the possibility of another dawn. You've been part of Echoes of War, where stories rise on quiet wings, and the past still circles above us, refusing to land.